I would like to introduce the chair of the panel, Ron Huesman from the University of Minnesota, who is the principal researcher for the Zero project and also a senior analyst at the University of Minnesota. Ron, please take it away.
Thank you, Igor. I'll say there was a version of this panel that was presented recently at the AUDI annual meeting in Boulder, and Igor was in attendance during that panel, and he suggested that this would be of interest to CERA members as well. So we're doing part 2 or redo of 2 with some additional members to the panel. So I want to thank you, Igor, for the opportunity. Hopefully in the survey world, at least, we can use this information to make the world a little less chaotic and more manageable. At this time, I'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves. Go in alphabetical order by last name. So Bill, I'll have you start. If you give us a little background and what you are, where you're from, and what kind of area of interest you are in surveys.
What I am, I'll be happy to go on. Yeah, I'm Bill Armstrong at institutional research at UC San Diego. Also, among other duties, I'm also responsible for large-scale centralized surveys that we conduct through our office on campus, the UQs being foremost among those, in addition to our other surveys that we attend to, such as the Harry surveys, such as the SERP first-year survey, first college year survey, college senior surveys. We also conduct post-baccalaureate and alumni surveys as well. So we do a lot of centralized research, survey analytics and research out of this office. So I primarily am responsible for doing that and have been the UQ's coordinator on campus pretty much since the inception of the survey or the instantiation of the survey here at UC San Diego. So long and variegated history with conducting.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
Debbie?
Hi, I'm Debbie Crimmins. I work at Northwestern University, which is a private university in Evanston, Illinois. And I work in IR, and we do have a student surveys planning group. And our major surveys are done through a private consortium of universities that we belong to.
Well, welcome, Debbie. It's nice having you here as a guest, and appreciate you being here. Amy?
Everyone, Amy Nakatani. I'm at the University of Colorado Boulder. My backdrop is deceiving, so it should be mountains behind me instead. But thanks for having us. I am in the Office of Data Analytics and Institutional Research, and I am the Director of Measurement, Assessment, and Insights. The main 3 areas I oversee for my unit are the large campus-wide surveys, the faculty course questionnaires or student evaluations of teaching, and then our student learning outcome assessment.
Great. Welcome, Amy. Thank you. Shelly?
Hi, my name is Shelly Wymer. I'm the Director of the Office of Measurement Services within the Institutional Analysis. We also house the University Survey Research Center. So like my colleagues, we do a lot of surveys for researchers, large-scale surveys, smaller programmatic surveys for institutional improvement. We also have the student rating and teaching, and we process course exams. And for those of you that probably know, we also administer CERAs. So you probably have worked with one of my project managers to get that administered at the school at your institution. I'm also the chair of our University Survey Advisory Team, and we're the business owner of Qualtrics. So we kind of wear those hats when we're tackling survey governance on our campus.
Great, thank you, Shelly. Appreciate you being here. And last but not least, and I guess, Andy, you might be used to this if we go in alphabetical order. Andy?
Hi, everyone. Andy Zehner at Purdue University. We're about 2 years into a survey oversight process. So that's my experience in survey oversight and management. Apart from that, I'm an analyst at Purdue. We call our institutional research office IDATA, Institutional Data Assessment and Analytics. And I, in addition to doing all things with the CERU, also consult with branches across campus to design and implement surveys. and report on the results. I do other things too, but increasingly surveys have been more and more of my work in recent years.
Great. Thank you, Andy. So you can see we have a pretty good panel of experts here, I think, that can help us navigate this web of survey governance. For the format of this panel, it's going to be primarily a discussion. I'll have a few brief introductory remarks here, followed by questions that we worked on as a panel to ask specific panelists. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for Q&A with the audience after that. So I'll just start off by saying the use of survey data has become more and more critical to institutional research and higher ed in general. And that was really well outlined by Greg yesterday during his presentation on the history of SERU and just the use of survey information in institutional research and how that's grown. I think it's safe to say also that there's been an increase in the number of surveys over the years, especially with COVID, there seemed to be even more. Everyone wanted to know something about what was happening with the students or faculty or staff. And I use surveys quite a bit in my own work, and I know they can really provide useful information. And now it's never been easier to conduct a survey. I did not say anything about the quality of the survey, but it's easier to do. The tools are very easy to use, and with online surveys, they generally are fairly inexpensive. But along with all that has been an increasing difficulty in obtaining good response rates from our students and other stakeholders that we're interested in as they get more and more invitations to share their input from various audiences. There's often very legitimate needs for conducting a survey, but there often is a limited knowledge about what other sources of data may exist that could answer those questions to meet institutional needs. There's a kind of a lack of institutional meta awareness often about what surveys are in the field and who they're going to, and what are most useful for current questions that the institution has. This is where the idea of survey governance comes into play. Much like data governance, it can play a pivotal role in providing institutional awareness and putting procedural structures in place to aid in common awareness of existing data and give us an understanding where our surveys are appropriate or not. So survey governance, in my mind, should play an educational role in promoting better survey methodology, promoting better alignment between developing questions to be answered, and promoting sampling design and coordination across various units to share common data to reduce the burden on our survey takers. And I think the end goal of all this obviously would be to get better data from our samples that are representative from their respective populations and to increase the likelihood of participation, reduce survey fatigue, if you will. And that's, generally these are topics that as a group, whenever we get together, we tend to gravitate towards those conversations. And so this is really a conversation that we're going to have here amongst the panelists to share ideas and best practices on what these 5 institutions are doing to help answer these questions. But before I begin, what would a panel on survey governance be without a short poll? So we put together a very short poll, 1 item here at the beginning and then 1 item at the end. And Igor, if you would put that up, that would be great. Very simple. Do you have an institute? Does your institution have a survey coordination group or committee? Yes, no, or you're exploring the idea? Yeah. We'll just give a second here to get people to chance to respond. All right, 27 out of 27 have participated. I see there's 51 people participating, minus, I suppose, the 6 people on the panel. But not a bad response rate. Interesting, 39% say they do, 39% no. And we got 21% exploring. That's interesting. When we did this with the ADI group, we had about a 16% said yes. So we have a little more of this going on here with this group. So we can end the poll, I think. All right. So the first question is really kind of a 3-part question, and it's and I would like to start with Bill and Amy. because you two are kind of in institutions where you're beginning this process and you're thinking through what it is. And the first part of the question is really the steps you've taken to get buy-in on implementing survey governance to your institution. And the second part is what steps have you taken to develop it once you've decided on how to implement it? And then we'll do a follow-up question with that with Shelly, Debbie, and Andy next. So Bill.
Thank you, Ron. In fact, if I were participating in that poll, I would have been option 3, exploring the idea. We say at the outset, we are in a nascent stage of developing a policy, achieving buy-in through sharing, discussion, incorporating feedback, and so forth. So the steps that we've taken thus far, and in consultation with our IR director, we first attempted to achieve buy-in through sort of step 1 of the 12-step, describe the problem. And the question here would be, of course, and Ron summarized it nicely at the outset, the rapid proliferation of online surveys. It's sort of become what junk mail was to mail-in surveys in the 80s and 90s. Now we have a lot of that. Electronic surveys are pretty much everywhere. The minute you close a transaction, you're immediately surveyed about how it went. Then, of course, there's a problem with the growth in sample size. We've lost sort of the art of sampling, relying then it's easy to do a census, let's why not do it all? So it went from statistical samples to census samples, which are not samples, that's census, that's everyone. And of course, describing the problem includes showing decreased response rates. We're having particular problems this year with our large-scale campus surveys, not just with UQs, but also with other surveys that we've typically have done, resulting in survey fatigue. We also describe the problem in terms of overlapping survey administrative gathering windows, that is windows that overlap with same populations, is another way to describe the problem. Duplication of effort, information gathering, relying on surveys to gather actuarial data that actually are available in other sources. Why not just do a survey to gather things? Why do a survey when we can gather things that we already have institutionally? And then there's an issue with the proliferation of surveys. The survey items often need to be reviewed. One of the roles I've had in the last couple of years is surveys are shared with me and some other campus partners, perhaps in student affairs or in other areas, which really need substantial revision. Some have already been in the field for a while and needed to be reviewed ahead of time as terms of clarity, language, appropriateness, accessibility, always an issue, and privacy concerns. And of course, attendant upon this is data security, confidentiality, and privacy consideration. So how do we attempt to describe this problem and explain it to campus partners as well as campus leadership? So review of current survey practices and processes. Right now, it primarily rely on informal consultation practices, contacting a colleague that we know do a large-scale survey right about the time you typically do, trying not to overlap with each other. So that collegial approach to advise about surveys planned or in the field, and an attempt to avoid overlapping surveys, overlapping samples, overlapping populations. At one time, we had a small informal committee, the IRCC, Institutional Research Coordinating Committee. It was coordinated by our Dean of Undergraduate Education. And that was an informal group that would take a look at planned surveys and try to avoid overlap. It wasn't really there to look at content, but we tried to make sure there was not existing data that already could answer their questions. So that's another step we could try to take, reliance on existing data. And so we became, however, all these things became obviated because we used to be able to control somewhat access to student contact information, but that became obviated with greater access to student contact information. So that approach has kind of hit and miss outcomes. So that's why we're exploring the idea right now of developing a comprehensive survey policy on our campus. So we reviewed content, procedures, and forms in a variety of similar institutions, both by control and by selectivity and by type. R1 UCs and non-UCs. Of course, that's like saying we reviewed all cars, foreign and domestic. Nonetheless, we summarized our general findings and I shared with our IR director. Once I incorporated the feedback from our director, we discussed the developed a draft executive summary of campus policy that was shared with partners in student affairs assessment, and also in resource administration, teaching and learning. Cameron's our campus privacy officer and our IRB liaison. So trying to get feedback and inclusion, getting campus partners engaged and involved, and because potentially some of them will be on the campus survey consultation committee. They don't know it yet, but they
Yeah.
And then incorporate that feedback and continuously redraft and re-prepare. Do a little PowerPoint summary that we can prepare then for when we feel we're ready to present to the EBC's leadership team. So right now we're working with campus partners and members of the academic affairs leadership team in particular to hone and refine this proposal stuff. And one thing I'm looking forward to hearing today are those institutions, not only on our August panel here, but also from members, I mean audiences members who said they actually had a policy in place. I'd love to hear what that might be. So that's a description of how we would try to achieve, how we're trying to achieve buy-in. So it's getting campus partners involved, getting people on board, having input, incorporating their feedback, and that's largely been in my purview, and I work closely with our director to develop that.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Amy?
Hi, so there are some similarities with what Bill said, but I think CU Boulder's similar to all the rest of your universities as well. We're seeing reduced survey participation, right? Lower response rates, more survey fatigue. And our campus leadership has said we'd like a survey policy. We'd like someone to help manage all these surveys happening on campus. I know that if we just sort of write this policy and publish it and say everyone needs to go through a survey approval policy now, there would not be the buy-in needed to have it be successful. So in the process of getting to that step, I'll just kind of mention where we are now and what our plans are. We do, I think, as Bill said, it sounds pretty similar. We have sort of an organic process right now where we collaborate and have strong relationships with a lot of campus units that do a lot of the main large campus-wide surveys. So a few things we do publish all those large surveys. We have a survey calendar on our website that lets people know what to expect and lets you really see if there's conflicts going on between some of the main surveys. We have my office also runs a CU survey group monthly meeting that is open to anyone. Everyone is welcome, anyone interested in survey data. So it's just kind of fostering some community among campus partners that like survey data, and it usually does also include some of those main departments that are the main users or administrators of surveys. So student affairs, undergrad ed, strategic relations, our IT office. We have good working relationships with them. And so what that CU survey group does is it helps us really communicate and keep track of what the main surveys are happening on campus. And we collaborate with each other on those surveys as far as the timing or splitting up the population, the samples so that they don't overlap with each other, sharing survey results amongst each other, that sort of thing. So it's happening this sort of survey governance is kind of happening organically right now, just with goodwill between the different departments. The other thing that we're going to be piloting this fall and we're working hard on now over the summer, before sort of implementing this whole survey approval policy is we're going to be piloting what we're calling a student opinion panel this fall, where students will opt in to be part of this student panel, and they will get incentivized for every survey that they participate in, et cetera. We're basically what that's going to do is it's going to give units on campus that want to collect their data an opportunity to use the student panel to collect their data without having to send it out to a random group of students on campus that may or may not want to hear from you. So by setting that up in advance of doing a survey approval policy, it's going to give people another option. So I'm not saying this very well, but basically our leadership is calling it a survey approval policy. I think that sounds too strong and too scary. I like to call it a survey management plan, which is broader than just that approval process. My survey management plan is sort of 3 steps. First, share survey data whenever possible, right? Step 2, if the data, those large scale campus surveys that are happening right now don't include the data that you need, consider using the student opinion panel because these students have already opted in and agreed to participate in answering survey questions. They're being compensated. If that also doesn't work for you, then that would bring you to that third tier where maybe there is a form you need to fill out that describes the survey you want to administer, who it's going to, the timing, et cetera. And then that's when this committee that we'd be forming would review all of those forms and provide the feedback. And again, as far as the buy-in, it's not, I would not call it a survey approval policy. Again, it's a management plan. So we're not going to be selling this as trying to tell you whether or not you can or can't collect that survey data. It's more about managing, right, recognizing you need this data, but doing it in a way that's not going to overburden students and employees with yet another survey, trying to coordinate it, et cetera. So managing surveys more. So that is the plan. I'm picturing the timeline for this being this summer, really collecting it and collecting data from other universities. If anyone has their survey policy well-defined already, I would love to talk with you. I'm collecting all that data this summer. The opinion panel we're planning to implement this fall, this school year, and then I would like to have our policy in place the year after next, so that again, people have that mid-level opinion panel as an option first. So hopefully that all made sense. I'm trying to think, I guess the main things we still have to do is to find a sponsor. So some leadership unit on campus, like the provost's office, that sort of sponsors this management plan. And then again, creating the actual policy and figuring out the resources that will be necessary. I'm not sure, but I think we probably will need another person on my team to help with this, just because I'm foreseeing we have a lot of surveys that happen on campus. I don't think it's a task that we can just tack on. I think it's going to require more personnel resources to make it happen. That's it.
Amy, we got a question in the chat about the student opinion panel. Maybe we could take a quick moment to describe that. The efforts to make it representative, size of it.
So
Yep.
Good questions. Yes. So I think the current plan right now is to let people that want, students that want to opt into this opinion panel opt in. But it will be representative as far as using quotas in the surveys to say if it's going out to undergraduate students, having the quotas be such based on gender and school, college, et cetera, that the people that respond will be chosen in the right numbers to be representative. I do recognize that there's going to be bias because students are opting into the opinion panel. That's certainly true. But I also know it's true that if you send out a survey to the entire census population and students respond to that survey, you've got the bias there as well.
Yeah.
So
great. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that and adding more to that. So for Shelly, Debbie, and Andy, I guess I'd ask you the same question, but if you would also elaborate more about, now I know you have processes in place, what you've done to keep them going, because there was another comment in the chat about there should have been an option 4 to our poll question. They've tried and to keep trying, they keep falling short. So that question about resources, how to keep it going, I think if you could add to that. And we'll start with Shelly. And then
So I think what's been important for us, I mean, everyone's touched on it already, but having a sponsor is a big one. Having somebody that cares and can kind of champion your cause is really important. I think one way in the early days where we really engaged the sponsor once we secured one, and we had our assistant vice provost or vice provost for undergraduate education and our provost, we geared it a lot around SERU, the people who cared about student experience data, and they wanted to make sure that we were collecting data and having high response rates and not overburdening our students. That's really where we found success in partnering with leaders. You'll find that, you know, there's, I lost my train of thought. So leaders will help out. We all have, we don't have sticks, right? So you'll find that out. There's not a lot of policies out there. We all have carrots that we're using, but ultimately we're going to have to go back when there's like some tiebreakers or we're not sure which direction to have, and having that sponsor is really important. Early on, we established annual plans, which said these are our goals for the year. These are the initiatives that we want to have to tackle those goals, and we go back to our sponsors and get approval for those. And that really helped us gain like some clout, some support when we went out to those partners and reached out and said why we were doing this, why we were having survey governance, why it was important for everyone. And through that, we were able to establish a committee structure. And that committee did a lot in the early days because we had a lot of initiatives that we needed to implement. And we were folks from all different types of offices, but primarily offices that were conducting a lot of surveys. If I had to do it over again, it's something that we are trying to do now is I'd like to have broader representation from each VP area because we started with, okay, who's doing a lot of surveys? How do we all play nice together? Which was great, but we could do that at a VP level. I think if we're looking at large scale surveys and say, let's look at our calendar next year. Let's not just wait for survey requests to start rolling in. How do we look a year ahead and plan and make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes? I think that would help keep it going because you'd have buy-in from the top early on, and then you could help filter that back down into the colleges and departments. And then we also secured other resources like we partnered a lot with IT. IT is our Qualtrics service owner. We pushed to get all of our users into one single platform. So we had a captive audience. We send a lot of communications, especially in the early days, to our Qualtrics users. These are our procedures. This is when you need to get help. Just constant communication. We also created a lot of purchasing data reports. So we would tell department heads like, oh, your users are still using SurveyMonkey. It costs all this money. If you just put everybody in this platform, we'd save it. And by the way, here's all the surveys that you're doing because we can actually see them once they're in Qualtrics. And pushing people into one system allowed us to find ways to communicate with them regularly. And it gave us something to report on to engage other department leaders along the way. And we really found that if we told people like, hey, you need to be in on this platform, here's the survey agenda, we all want high response rates, work with us to schedule things, they started to realize that it was mutually beneficial. And usually the folks that weren't following our guidelines just didn't know about them, or they weren't using that system because they were unaware. So communication planning became very, very important for us. We worked with some of OIT's communication specialists to educate users and Qualtrics users and surveyors early on. We put a lot of information on the web so that it's accessible there. And then for our committee, we have regular tasks. Some people do like one, and we try to create as much efficiency and process as we can. So we have certain surveys that can kind of go through the approval process. So if people own their own lists and it's within their purview, we let those go. We don't have unlimited resources to review the thousands and thousands of surveys that are going on. So we have some thresholds for what we will review and what we won't. And we create automations in our Qualtrics survey approval form where people can be automatically approved. So that takes care of those. And then we have some other ones that have a guide. So we have one person on our committee that can make decisions on behalf of the group very quickly because it kind of falls into these common use cases. And then we really only use the committee to determine if the survey can go forward if it's either a gray area or maybe you have two really important surveys that are colliding. And we'll talk together and say, okay, does your VP know that this survey is going on and what that means? No, they don't. So we facilitate a lot of conversations amongst leaders to make sure that they know or they're consciously deciding that they're going to survey the same stakeholder group at the same time and what that means for the students, what that means for the data, and we try to compromise.
Okay.
So there's a ton of communication there. We kind of divvy out the work as we can, and we build on initiatives based off of that. So we don't have dedicated people per se. We're all people in different units beyond myself as being the chair. But yeah, so yeah, we just kind of divided and conquered and used our central resources like our IT friends or relations or other folks as we can.
How many years has that advisory group been in existence?
I think it's been around for 12 years.
12 years. Yeah.
And Debbie's got me beat. They've been around even longer.
That's a good segue. Debbie, do you have,
Right.
yeah.
Yes, at Northwestern, we've had a student surveys planning group since the 1990s. And our structure is we have a small executive committee, which includes IR, student affairs, someone from the provost office, and someone from the undergraduate college. And so that group really decides about any survey requests and also helps us plan. There's a bigger group that meets 3 times a year and helps us plan those meetings, because those meetings include representatives from all of the schools and a number of people from central administration. And that's where we really try to share survey results and encourage people to use the results, to disseminate them to their groups. And as Amy said, we also have a survey schedule, and if people are wanting to do, we only really require approval if you're doing a university-wide survey. If you're just surveying your own school or department, you don't need approval for that. But then we also try to encourage people to sample, and we have sort of a master list, and so we sort of dole out certain numbers of students so that students don't get surveyed multiple times.
How big a survey is considered a university-wide survey, Debbie?
Well, any survey that wants to try to reach all students, and not just like the math department or the education school.
Were you there at the beginning of this group and how it started?
No.
Okay.
I came a bit later, but
Okay. But it seems like it's working.
yeah, I think I was thinking too of like everyone, our response rates have probably gone down, but I think they've leveled off some. And then it's also very dependent on the population. Like we do a first year student survey, and that there's maybe a bit of a dip during COVID, but that's of course our highest response rate. And then by the time you get to seniors, they're much more jaded, and it's much more difficult to keep up response rates.
Okay. We'll get a bit more into that in a second. So thank you. Andy?
The way to keep it going is to continue to add improved services. You have to have a calendar. Improve that calendar so that it provides more information to those who are planning. And every semester perpetuate, get your survey on the calendar. The sooner you get it on the calendar, the likely you are to get the time spot that you want. In addition, do all you can to get previous survey data shared and promulgate that. This information is already available. It's here now, you can use it. The thing that we're focusing on right now, that's another innovation, is standardized constructs. We're all interested in measuring belonging. Here's the way to do that. Drag this from the library into your Qualtrics questionnaire. This is the right way to do it. This standardizes your questions about belonging with other surveys so that you can compare yours with others. We've got standardized constructs on belonging, on inclusive advising, on academic rigor, on what we call the Gallup-Purdue experience. And those are new things that deputy provosts and assistant deans get excited about and continue to talk about. Nobody's talking about our survey oversight committee process itself anymore because it's 2 years old, but they are talking about these new things that we're adding. And continually having something new to enhance the process is the way to keep it going.
Thank you, Andy. Is that group that who's on that group? Your survey oversight committee? Is it?
Well, the three essential things are the mandate from the provost, and he really only just had to say, yes, do this. His main function was over in the first half hour of our initiative. He said,
Okay.
yes. Then it was a panel that we pulled together of representatives from academic colleges, student life, cultural centers. I wish we had kept it more focused on students only, but we included staff organizations and various other things. We included the graduate and the undergraduate student government leaders. And we have a panel of about 10 people who are more or less involved. And their task was consensus. They provided us with some subject matter expertise, but chiefly they told us how far we could go. The initial pushback of, well, I don't want you telling me I can do this or that, or you're saying that you're going to tell me whether I can ask students in the dining service whether they want an apple or a banana. No, we're not saying that, you know. And once we had those hard conversations where what we were proposing was beneficial to them without being likely to inhibit them, they bought in and they said, yes, we'll go with you this far. We'll support the initiative this far. And then we said, yeah, we can work with that.
Okay.
And then their job from then on was simply to ensure that all the academic departments, all the residence halls, all the student organizations were hearing about this. Get your survey on the calendar, look at the library of available data before you do another one, and those things. So that's who the panel is.
Great, thank you. Is there any other final comments that anyone wants to share on that? Okay. So Andy and Shelly, Andy, we'll start with you. Okay. Not last this time. So one of the end goals of survey governance is to reduce survey fatigue. I think we've touched on that. And there's been some talk about the procedures. So what procedures have you implemented to protect students from being over-surveyed? And how do you do that? Is it through technology? Is it through some policies with IRB? Are there exempt surveys?
I draw the samples for any approved survey. We really only ask people if they're sampling the general student population and they're going to sample 1,000 or more to work through us. If they're only sampling their club or only sampling students in a major or any other small narrow group where the person doing the polling has the complete list of all students. But if it's a general student outreach, we ask them to come to us, and because I maintain a database of who's been contacted, I can draw a sample that is very closely tailored to what the researcher is looking for and ensures that students won't be touched too many times. In the spring semester just passed, I handled 20 surveys for undergraduates, and no undergraduate student was sampled more than 4 times. And every researcher got a sample that was tailored to their target. We will not sample on sexual preference or anything financial or disability status, but anything that's institutional data, anything that's record data, we sample on, and we give them a small sample. We try to convince them you don't need a large number. You need an appropriate sample that's suitable for your research. So we've talked people down in size and helped them get what they want.
So how do you remain persistent in that conversation? Because it can be very stuck thinking that they need that larger end to get,
I've made a presentation that I've given a number of times. presenting, it is a law of nature. You know, the central tendency principle is a law of nature, just like gravity, and have demonstrated it to them. Gosh, if you spin a penny on a tabletop, it won't land tails up half time. It'll land tails up 80% of the time because the penny is not weighted. And you get people to do that and they'll say, oh, and then you point out that that's just one penny. That's just a few pennies. You don't need 50% of all the pennies in existence.
Yeah.
Once you've done something 50 times, you start to know what you're going to measure. Ron, you said it yourself yesterday that some school got a 70% response rate, but that the first 10% of that sample had accurately measured what they were seeking to understand. Right. And we have to get to the point where we're scientific in our sampling and we don't waste the students' time to get that additional 60% that didn't add any understanding.
Thank you, Andy. I was really kind of appreciative how you might be approaching that, because I use the blood sample. You don't want to take all your blood to do a blood sample. So yes,
right.
Yes, yeah. Shelly, I'll ask you the same question. I mean, what are we doing at Minnesota
I don't know if there's anything different than things that have already been mentioned. I mean, we have a project approval process, so some people get told no sometimes. We tend to tell, if people are surveying our students, faculty, or staff out of convenience, we will say no to that. They have to have a business or educational need that will impact or benefit the folks that they are surveying. So we will deny those requests. We'll send them over to purchase sample from a sample vendor or use MTurk or something like that. So we do deny things. We have a survey calendar that we schedule around, which we've all talked about. Andy hit the nail on the head with sample management. That has to be done, and talking people down off of census surveys is a big part of that. Just recently, our College of Liberal Arts research group just finished a Canvas training on sampling. It's kind of at a high level and kind of meant for leaders, because it's the leaders that don't get it sometimes, because they want everybody to have a chance and have a voice. And that's where we've really struggled to make, where they, you know, how do you ask everybody how the pandemic's going from an educational standpoint and sample? We have a really hard time with those conversations, and we go back to scheduling. Like if we can't sample, we schedule around so people aren't getting it at the same time. Data sharing, which was already mentioned, obviously that's the first step, getting data that we already have. We leverage some existing policies. For example, we already have a mass email policy. Mass email policy says you can't send emails out to all faculty, for example, unless you have somebody that sponsors that email or approves of that email. And we basically latch on to that in our Qualtrics user agreement and say that you're not allowed to use that as a mass email engine if you don't have the same approvals to send out those emails. We work with U-Relations to put the emails that we're sending to large groups following their guidelines on their mass communications calendar. So if folks are going to send a smaller departmental survey out, they know not to send it out on the same day that the president's sending out an important message. So we try to not even hit them with multiple emails all at the same time, giving the broader context, because emails are emails. They're getting inundated with far beyond just surveys. They're getting information all the time. So we try to be cognizant of that. And then the last thing I would add is that we are purchasing Qualtrics XM. Andy talked a little bit about this yesterday in our group. Their experience management platform has settings that'll allow you to, you know, say, I don't want students to be surveyed more than X number of times within this period. That would kind of automate some of the things that we're doing manually now. And we'll look into that feature and use our governing body to determine what those settings should be and to what extent we want to use them. So that's kind of the newer things that we're looking at, but everything else that everyone's mentioned already.
Great. Thank you. Very, very insightful. Debbie, since you guys have had this group since the 1990s, it's pretty well established. And you kind of alluded to this too, I believe or Amy did maybe, the carrots. That's usually what we have for incentives to keep people compliant. We don't have a lot of sticks. So what are you doing at Northwestern, Debbie? If someone doesn't get approval and goes ahead and does a survey, and they do across the campus, for example, what are the consequences of that, if any?
Let's see, well, I can't really recall us having that situation, and I'm not sure what we would.
Well, maybe your group is working very well. And
Yeah, or
Yeah,
we just,
yeah.
And I think we would have to obviously, talk with the person and their supervisor to make sure it wouldn't happen again. But it's not something that has really.
Oh, that's fine. Amy or Bill, thoughts on compliance, or just if something like that did happen, let's just hypothetically, or anyone else? Yeah.
We don't have any kind of sticks right now. I can't really think of one that we could use at CU Boulder. It will have to be more goodwill and people knowing this is the right thing to do. But I have heard of some other institutions that maybe can limit people's Qualtrics accounts if they, as a stick. We don't have the ability at CU Boulder to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we have a similar situation. Again, we are in the consultative stage and review stage for this, but as many of us realize, especially the R1s like this, we as higher education and organizational psychologists note, these loosely coupled institutions. That is, they derive their authority and agency from sort of more independent sources and resist centralization. In fact, our institution was designed sort of with that in mind at the time. So it's much more difficult, the carrots versus sticks. One of the things that we're trying to do is emphasize the creation of our, and we renamed it the Campus Survey Consultation Committee rather than the review group to seem less onerous. And that's our honey versus vinegar approach. And again, we're trying to achieve compliance through amplifying the benefits of having your survey reviewed and modified and improved and by this group to provide expert survey assistance for surveys. And as a method of compliance, we would be the ones to provide student contact and background information to minimize gathering of often redundant demographic information for the seed file that they might be using. And we content review of survey instrument, review for inadvertent requests for confidential or sensitive data. We're trying to emphasize that we can actually make your survey better and improve the items that are on there. Oftentimes I'm called upon to do not called upon, but need to do item reviews for surveys that are being anticipated. So I try to carefully offer suggestions for improvement, and often people are grateful for that. And suggested recommendations for survey design, item writing, and logistics and timing. And in addition, we would provide curricula and host workshops, webinars, tutorials in best practices in survey research, and they would be the beneficiaries of this honey versus vinegar approach. And designate, and one of the things we can offer is we're proposing that we be designated with the imprimatur of official UC San Diego survey. And that would help to instill, we hope, student trust, confidence, and enhance participation rather than having surveys coming, from Dodge City. We would have it as something official from us. We would also ask that, or require in many cases, that survey administrators proposing a large-scale survey, and we could talk about, where do we trigger the campus survey consultation to review? Is it 5% of the total 30,000 undergraduate population, or 5% of the graduate student, whatever? Or is it all members of a certain grouping of students? That's being worked on. So when is that trigger review? But anyway, we would talk about online FERPA training before being provided student contact information, and also participate in additional privacy training. So there's a lot of steps to go through, but we're trying to emphasize our gateway versus gatekeeper role. And that's one of the ways we would try to get compliant, because as we talked about in our pre-meeting, sticks don't work well around here. So that's one of the ways we're trying to do it, for providing expert survey systems. And like I said, I found that when I work with other people, different units, and I do a lot of consultation work informally and formally with other units, such as the library, such as strategic initiatives and others, they are appreciative, and the resulting information they get is improved. Especially when I ask the question about what are you trying to get at here, trying to improve the validity and reliability of their items.
Yeah, no, I think we all kind of are cut from the same bolt of cloth there in terms of how we want to approach this. And collegiality and the sweet, honey, it seems to be a better approach if you can make it work that way. We're getting close to our time. I just want to ask the final question, and any of you can answer this. So what does success look like in this area? And then we'll get to some of the comments I'm seeing in the chat. But I mean, do you feel like you've been successful in these processes you put in place? And do you have any evidence of it if you do feel that way? I'll open it to the group here.
I'll go first. I would point out that higher response rates is going to be a lagging indicator. It will only show up after we've really made serious accomplishments in communicating better and fewer overall surveys. That's going to be the last thing that we'll observe. But I do think that our group has made accomplishments, and the palpable evidence of it is we know we've stopped a handful of surveys. Those that were especially coming from off campus and didn't provide any direct value to any campus constituent, that we were able to say, you know what, no. Normally they would have gotten access to our student population, and we've been able to stop that. We definitely have boosted interest in existing data, none greater than the CERU, but there have been people who said, oh yes, I'll use that. And I know that we've spread the burden among students much more broadly than it previously was. We have not yet gotten any control over the incredible use of Qualtrics to send out things. And one thing I would advise anyone, get your Qualtrics metadata. And as quickly as I can, we discovered that in 2020, Purdue constituents created 28,000 instruments, only about a third of which were even launched, and only a small fraction got more than 20 responses. And 84% of our Qualtrics instruments that were created by someone who had done fewer than 10, and 40-some% were created and launched, I should have said. Of those that were launched, almost half were created by someone who'd never done a previous Qualtrics instrument before. There's literally nothing we do on our campus where so much is done by so amateur people, and it's out there and it's annoying to the students, and the students are making a correct judgment about the usefulness of them spending their time doing all those things. Ours is worthwhile, but the students can't discern ours from all those others.
Others have thoughts on what success looks like in this field or this area?
I agree with everything Andy said. He is so right on all of those things. I think one caveat would be that we look at maybe slowing down the decrease of response rates instead of increasing them. Sometimes we don't see the increase, but we're dropping slower than some of our peers, and we're still maintaining in like the 30% is always like a big success. So yeah, slowing down as opposed to increasing might be something you want to think about. And then the less tangible things are when leaders say, well, have you asked our group is called USAT, University Survey Advisory Team, also advisory to be nice. They ask, have you asked USAT when they can schedule that? Or have you talked to them about this survey? And when that starts happening, I feel like we've created a culture where we're all trying to plan together. People will say, when's CERU? Is it administered this spring? Because I need to do a survey this year. So having those questions and people being directed to our group, to me shows that it's working because we're all working together. We're getting a lot less surprises of somebody in some unit signed up for a consortium-like survey, like a CERU, that we knew nothing about, and they paid a bunch of money, and now we're forced to give them sample and fit them into our calendar. That really doesn't happen anymore. Those things come to our group, we review it, we bring leaders into the room, and we make sure that we're making a conscious decision on what surveys that we're tackling. So that's just a way I feel like that's been ingrained in what we do, more so than the things you can count.
Right.
I couldn't agree more with Andy and Shelly emphasized, and not much more I can add. The lagging indicator that really resounds with me, because that is something, she was like, well, we've implemented this policy, how come the response rates haven't improved this year? Well, that's going to be something that would be difficult to see. But what I'm looking perhaps for, if this goes through and ever adopted, we'll see what I call the intermediate outcomes improvement. That is, the surveys will be better constructed, they'll be more appropriate, they'll address privacy and accessibility for all groupings. They'll include an equity focus when appropriate and needed, which is often. Items themselves will be improved. We'll see existing data being used more often, and minimal overlap with selected samples. And again, these intermediate outcomes, I'm hoping, then would have an effect down the road of reducing cert fatigue, enhancing student confidence in the surveys. Because Andy pointed out very astutely that when surveys get out there with poor items that are just tendentious, or a whole lot of open-ended items, which reflects the lack of prior preparation by the survey preparer, students tend to shy away, and it hurts all of us because they don't know who is coming from or why I should trust this one. That last one was so terrible. So that's another reason why we can all benefit. And also, I'm hoping at an intermediate outcome, we would see smaller samples relying more on statistically derived sampling rather than less large-scale census sampling. So intermediate outcomes versus the final reduced fatigue, improved response rates outcomes, which, we have attribution problems galore with that one. But that's what I'm hoping for in the processes would improve.
Great. Thank you, Bill. We're getting close. There's a question in the chat here I'd like to pose to the group. We're curious about the extent to which any of the survey governance structures or policies are connected with data governance processes, particularly if survey data is part of the data warehouse or other centralized data access points. Trying to work, she goes on, so trying to work smarter, not harder. And I think, Andy, you mentioned a little bit about definitions. Was that part of data governance?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Just as quickly as I can, we urge people to use the institutional data and to use the characteristics that are available, and to plug in. Student anonymity is not very important. Anything that we can plug in from institutional data, we urge people to do that. There are occasions when they need to talk about disability, sexual orientation, or poverty, and the CERU is great for that. But wherever we can use definitions, and our Disability Resource Center gave us a list and said, please use this list of categories to describe disability. So we've tried to standardize that.
Okay. Are there others that have tied data governance with the survey governance work?
I made a note in there. As a part of the experience management platform, we are starting to, so just like Andy, we were, our institutional research shop is always pulling the same demographic data, institutional data with the same queries that, have definitions. We're trying to replicate that through a PeopleSoft Qualtrics integration. And in doing that, we're making sure that we're pulling data that's only been governed, that only has common definitions across the enterprise. And that all lives in a common data layer, which I know a lot more about than I ever thought I would. But so integration wise, we'll be able to pull data that everybody knows what the definition is. There's agreed upon definitions, and we won't be kind of mixing and matching based off of who's pulling the data and what they're looking at. So data governance has served a big part of telling us which fields we can have. You know, Andy mentioned not getting some data fields and not giving those to survey respondents. We have data custodians that'll say, yes, that's appropriate use of that field. You can pull that into your directory, or no, we're not going to give you, you know, any financial Pell eligibility status, for example, is something that we won't be pulling into the directory.
Well, I want to thank you for the panelists especially, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's been a great panel and closing the symposium. We don't have a closing ceremony. Probably
No,
if we
okay.
were in person, we would have a ceremony of some sort. But thank you so much. I think it was 2 great days, very interesting discussions. I am really grateful for all the presenters, all the panelists, session chairs, organizers who made this symposium possible. Online events after 2 years are not as exciting as they were, but I thought that, you know, we had a pretty good discussions, and this is all very informative in addressing challenges that all CIRO members have. And I've learned a lot personally, although I was involved in preparations and knew something, but I learned a lot during the panels. I'd like to thank specifically Gemma Givens at the CSHE, who helped with the video production and all the things behind the scenes of this complicated online events. And I look forward to meeting you all next year. My hope, I wanted to do this year in a hybrid modality, but didn't happen. But my hope is that we can bring together people in Berkeley next year. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you all next time.